222 to nothing. Not a typo, not a video game, a real sanctioned college football game played in front of real fans on a real field more than 100 years ago. One team scored 32 touchdowns. The other team never crossed midfield with any consequence. They never picked up a single first down the entire game. But here's the part nobody tells you. The team on the losing end of the worst beating in college football history didn't even have a football team. They'd quit the sport months earlier. They were dragged onto that field against their will, and the man who forced them to play did it out of pure, simmering revenge over something that had nothing to do with football. This is the story of how a grudge match turned into a massacre. To understand the slaughter, you have to understand the man behind it. John Heisman. Yes, that Heisman. The man whose name is on the most famous trophy in American sports. In 1916, he was the head coach at Georgia Tech, and he was one of the most innovative and competitive minds the game had ever seen. But Heisman didn't just coach football. He also ran the school's baseball team. And that spring, something happened on the diamond that he could not let go of. Georgia Tech's baseball team played Cumberland, a small school out of Lebanon, Tennessee. And Cumberland didn't just win, they humiliated Tech. The final score was 22 to nothing. Now, Heisman was convinced that loss wasn't fair. He believed Cumberland had cheated, that they'd quietly stacked their roster with professional players, ringers, hired guns brought in to embarrass his team. Whether that was true or not almost doesn't matter, because in Heisman's mind, a debt had been created, and Heisman was the kind of man who collected his debts with interest. He didn't have to wait long for his chance. The two schools were already scheduled to meet on the football field that coming October, and Heisman intended to make Cumberland pay for every single one of those 22 runs. But there was a problem, a big one. By the time the 1916 football season arrived, Cumberland didn't have a football team anymore. The school had disbanded its program entirely. There were no players, no practices, no squad. The sport was simply gone from campus. So Cumberland tried to do the obvious thing. They tried to cancel. Heisman said no. In fact, Heisman threatened legal action if they didn't show up, and there was money on the line. A contract clause meant that if Cumberland backed out, they'd owe Georgia Tech $3,000. In 1916, that was a crippling sum for a tiny school like Cumberland. So they were trapped. Pay a fortune they didn't have, or somehow produce a football team out of thin air. They chose to play. The job of building this ghost team fell to a student named George Allen, the captain of that very baseball squad that had started this whole mess. And Allen did the only thing he could. He went recruiting, not on a field, in the fraternity houses. He grabbed his frat brothers, he pulled in students from the law school, regular guys, most of whom had never played organized football in their lives, were handed uniforms and told they were now representing Cumberland College against one of the best teams in the country. Roughly 12 volunteers made the trip to Atlanta. They knew they were going to lose. What they didn't know was just how badly. The game was played on October 7th, 1916 at Grant Field in Atlanta. It was over almost before it began. In the first quarter alone, one quarter, Georgia Tech scored 63 points. By halftime, the score was 126 to nothing. 126 at the half. Now, here's where most coaches would show mercy. Pull the starters, run out the clock, let the poor kids go home. But not Heisman. This was the revenge he'd been waiting months for, and he had a halftime speech ready. He told his team, quote, "You never know what those Cumberland players have up their sleeve. So in the second half, go out and hit them clean, hit them hard. Do not let up." They did not let up. Tech scored in every quarter. They returned interceptions for touchdowns. They returned fumbles, punts, and kicks. Cumberland's offense, meanwhile, went backwards, losing yardage on the ground and through the air. As one local paper put it, all of Cumberland's plays were smothered completely. They never earned a single first down the entire afternoon. When the final whistle blew, the scoreboard read 222 to nothing. 32 touchdowns, the most points one team has ever scored in a single college football game. The most lopsided result the sport has ever seen. There's one quote that survived from a Cumberland player, given decades later, that says everything about what the day felt like. He said, quote, "I think one of our best plays of the game was when one of our players got the ball on a pitch out and he lost only 10 yards. Losing 10 yards was a highlight. That's how bad it was. And yet, here's the strange beauty of it. Cumberland is remembered today not in spite of that game, but because of it. A school that quit football, got dragged back out onto the field, and got beaten worse than anyone in history, became immortal. Their name lives on 100 years later, precisely because of the worst day in their sporting history. Heisman got his revenge, but Cumberland got something he never expected. They got remembered forever. More than a century has passed. Football has changed beyond recognition, and still no team has ever come close to that number. 222 to nothing remains untouched. The most one-sided game ever played. A record born from a baseball grudge, a broken contract, and 12 fraternity brothers who showed up knowing they'd lose and made history anyway. If you enjoyed this one, there are dozens more stories like it. Moments history almost forgot. Subscribe and I'll keep digging them up.